You're listening to episode 9 of The Secular Buddhist. Hi everyone. Today we're presenting the second part of our conversation with Grant Steeves about spirituality for atheists, and we'll get to that in a moment. But first, a question came up from the previous podcast, part 1 of that interview. I ran into Jack Caravelle this morning at Memorial Blood Centers. We and others were donating blood as part of our activities as atheists in Minnesota. Jack asked a very good and indeed critical question. Is feeling connected and being connected the same? No was my immediate answer. Our senses, our minds, are prone to error. We've all seen optical illusions as an example we can all relate to, but it goes much, much deeper, and why I always take the word evidence in the phrase empirical evidence with a grain of salt. As critical thinkers, as meditators, we all should. So, to say one had an experience while meditating is perfectly valid. You did. You had an experience. Where we get into untestable waters is when we start attributing causes to that experience for which we have little to no proof. Sure, we have an experience of connectedness. That doesn't mean we are connected. Maybe, maybe not. But unlike Deepak Chopra, I'm not going to claim I caused an earthquake because of my meditation. That being said, it's what we do with those experiences that counts. The feeling of connectedness I have prompts me to be more compassionate about others, to be more willing to see their point of view. It puts me in a frame of mind that helps me make better choices. Like I say at the conclusion of every podcast, we have a choice, every moment. We won't be perfect. I certainly continue to savor the taste of my own foot as I chew on it often. But this experience of meditation, this sense of connectedness, it helps. It doesn't have to have a quantum validity or supernatural component. Let's get back to Grant at Borders Books in St. Paul.
One of the things I mentioned to folks who are listening to this podcast is I was on my way into Borders for my meeting with Grant. There are these folks who were in front passing out these little cards. I'll read this to you. Unlocking the Secrets of Life, an Evening of Wisdom and Meditation, with a fellow whose name starts with His Holiness. It's not the Dalai Lama, it's someone else, and I won't go there. And some of the claims on this, which again drive me back. Remember, this is supposed to be about wisdom and meditation. And to us Buddhist-y folks, wisdom means a particular thing, meditation means a particular practice. And what's described in here is it's a birthright of every human being to have a violence-free society. I'm good with that. Disease-free body. Well, that would be nice, but I don't know, meditation's going to cure your cancer. And you're listening to two cancer survivors here, so we know of what we speak. Quiver-free breath.
Whatever that is.
Switch to decaf. Confusion-free mind. I'm good with that. Inhibition-free intellect. You know, some of my filters are good to have. Some divisions are appropriate. Trauma-free memory and sorrow-free soul. Holy S word. So I'm thinking of going to this thing just so I can ask, so, what do you mean, how is this contributing to a disease-free body? Just to see what it's like, to combat the woo.
Something, I'm going to reference another person that's in our group, that when I first met her, she was pretty hardcore atheist. She's had some illness since then, and her doctor has had her do meditation. She was one that I was talking to her about spirituality. This is a good year and a half ago now, I think.
Yeah.
And prior to that, she would never have even acknowledged what I was talking about.
Yeah.
But she was starting to get the benefits of her meditation. And she started to connect with what I was talking about. That I wasn't talking about something that was in the twilight zone.
Outside, yeah.
This is reality.
Yeah.
And I think the title of the book is Man Created God. It's written by a physician.
I'll check. My iPhone is handy.
It's about 2 years ago that the book was published. And he gets into the neurology and the science of the benefits of meditation, of what happens to the chemistry, and he is an atheist.
Uh-huh.
But he's not looking at it in terms of a supernatural. He is recognizing the benefits that happen to people by recognizing and knowing. That's it, yes.
Okay, the book is, and I will link this on the episode page for this interview, is Did Man Create God? Is Your Spiritual Brain at Peace with Your Thinking Brain? By David E. Cummings.
Yes. I think I reviewed that book. I can't remember the books that I've reviewed for our newsletter. I think I reviewed that book, though. And the crazy part of it is I bought her a copy of this book in the paperback when it came out. And the page, there's a problem with the numbering of the pages in here.
Oh, yeah.
And chapters and references in the index. And it's in the paperback, too. I said, I don't know who's in charge here of the publishing, but they both made mistakes. But his book is, he's a physician, and he really knows what he's talking about. He does have the evidence. Lots of footnotes. This is a scientific treatise. It isn't some spooky stuff going on. And even Harris, for those people that are advocates.
Sam Harris, yeah.
Sam Harris, wild advocates of Sam Harris. And go back to the end of his book, in which he talks about Buddhism in particular. And there are I have found a number of atheist writers have made reference to Buddhist practice.
Yes.
They don't identify Theravadism, which I think is unfortunate. Either they don't know that it exists, or they do, but they don't mention it, which I think would be unfortunate.
Yeah. And Sam Harris he wrote an article in Shambhala Sun called Killing the Buddha.
Yes.
And I'll link that again. I know I've linked it on the website already, but he does talk about a failure to acknowledge meditation as just a regular thing. As long as we call it Buddhist meditation, we don't call it Islamic algebra or Christian gravity, because and I agree with that wholeheartedly, is that it doesn't need to be held within a limiting context of the religious tradition from which it got its initial watering and sunlight and growth.
Right. And they're growing up within Catholic, not growing up, but practicing Catholicism for a few years.
Yeah.
One of the things about Catholicism in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, a number of the Jesuits began to connect with Zen in particular.
Yep.
And there are a number of books about Jesuits who learned to practice Zen. And he said, the meditation for Zen is to go to nothingness. And they said, the Jesus prayer is essentially the same thing, only we don't think that it's nothingness, we call it God.
Yep.
But maybe God and nothingness are the same thing.
Yeah, and in fact, in the symposium in episode 3, they bring up the Jesus prayers and how it's used in Christian meditation.
Now, you find that within the more mystical parts of Christianity, where you find it in Eastern Orthodox, you find it within Catholicism. But if you go to some of your more fundamentalist groups, this is called opening your mind to the demons.
Right.
By emptying your mind, you are opening it.
Yeah. Right. Was it Thomas Merton who was
Thomas Merton is huge.
Yeah.
He was very much interested in Zen Buddhism.
Yeah.
And in fact died while he was in Thailand attending a conference on Buddhism.
It's interesting you bring up the emptying of mind being a bad thing, and I think that's in the discussions that came about from episode 3, for those of you listening to this, go check out episode 3 because there's a symposium discussion. And I have a link on there that goes to the symposium and comments that people had. Mm-hmm. And one individual that I'd had a discussion with back and forth made a statement that was, and forgive me for paraphrasing, that, well, you don't want to empty your mind. That's bad because that's where Satan comes in. Without really the understanding or experience or even interest in caring to hear that when I'm meditating, I am far more aware of what's going on, and I'm much more sensitive to any intrusion by any outside agency or even myself. And so it's just a complete misapprehension of what meditation is and what nothingness, what sunyata is, what that is, because you don't need to take on a conflicting dogmatic ideal to have a tangible experience with meditation. And people see it as, oh no, that's Buddhism, that's another religion, is therefore wrong and not something we can do. Well, okay, but it doesn't, for those of us who do this practice, who don't have a religious dogma that we have to take on, that's not our background. We're Westerners who may not really take so well to a Thai practice or a Japanese practice or what have you, that it just culturally is not mixed. And that's something that Brooks said in our interview in what will be the previous podcast of this one, is that culturally we have the different scales, as he describes them in his book, and those are very appropriate, that we'll have a cultural resistance to something that just prevents us from even getting further step to what is the actual teaching, what's the actual point that we're trying to get to. Yeah.
Yes, and in his book on cultural intelligence, he does not go into religion, which I think is a curiosity, because to me religion is so much a part of culture. And I think this is one of the problems with, again, hardcore atheists.
Yeah.
That if you've been raised as an atheist in particular, like some of our friends have been, when you talk about a born-again experience, and by the way, most of your traditional religions, like Catholicism, does not have that experience. This is a charismatic thing, which did go through the Catholic Church, but it's founded within Pentecostalism. And Dan Barker and I had this conversation on the radio some time ago about, he said, I had an authentic experience of born again.
He talks about that in his book Godless.
And it's because if you're a religious person who's had the born again experience, you find it hard to believe that anyone would deny this.
Yeah, you know exactly what it is.
You know exactly what it is, but they don't believe that you could possibly know what this is and then turn around and go another direction. Well, I would not go so far as with Dan Barker, because I think I had this experience. But I'm willing to give some leeway to the holy and holy people in that maybe I didn't have an authentic one. But I know what they're talking about when they say they're filled with this spirit.
Here is the experience that I
Here is the experience. I understand that, and I don't dismiss it with a backhand like some of my
It's an actual experience.
It's an actual experience.
Drawn from it may be where we diverge, but the experience itself is...
and I come back to making love. That it's an ecstatic experience. It is something that you can't write down all the details. You probably could hook them up to a machine and find out electrically what's happening and chemically what's happening. They've done it with meditators.
Yes,
so we know this could happen. And clearly there's a change within the physical part of the body that makes them calm. They will describe it as having an overwhelming feeling of calm. That they have this connectedness to the universe, only that it's to God, and that they've surrendered. It's the AA person coming through. that now a higher power is in control. Well, all these things come back regardless of the religious experience.
Yeah,
Buddhist,
yeah.
Muslim, Hindu, wherever you want to go. They describe the same thing. It also comes out in people who have the near-death experience.
Mm-hmm.
They see white lights, stuff like this.
Yes. Yes.
And all the Christians see Jesus. All the Muslims see Muhammad. And,
I see the flying spaghetti monster.
And you see the flying spaghetti monster.
Yeah.
But they see someone over there on the other side, and it's always someone that is within their framework. In other words, a white person from the Aryan nation will not see a black Jesus on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you begin to understand that it is a mind thing, that it's a chemical thing that's happening in the brain because of deprivation of oxygen, as I understand, creates this chemical.
Actually, a number of things. There's another experiment I'm going to try to find and link up where it was about out-of-body experiences.
Right.
And I'll have that as a separate podcast episode because one of the other interviewees and are discussing this before. She'd written an entire article about her own experience with that. But they were talking about in surgery that they'd actually found a spot where they can replicate that experience, and this is the part of the brain we stimulate which creates that sense of being up, and you're looking down on your body thing, but none of you could read what was written on the ceiling that we wrote there specifically for people who were having out-of-body experiences as a line of evidence. Not once. And rumors of, they were able... No, they weren't. We actually checked into them. So, I mean, yes, it is still within this fathom-long body. It is still a natural experience that doesn't take away from how that can positively impact your life. The rubber hits the road and what spirituality is.
The other thing is that people who have these startling experiences, unlike the experience of the meditation, as far as I am able to discern, it's a passing thing. I've always thought of it in terms of the traveling preacher.
Yeah.
The tent revival, where you have the preacher comes to town and he really excites people emotionally and gets them to convert, give up their sins and all this. Preacher leaves, tent comes down, preacher leaves, and within a week we're back where we started from.
Right.
Because you can only sustain the high for so long.
Yeah.
And then you come back to reality, your old sinful ways usually.
Yeah.
And when you have these unnecessary or over expectations of what's going to come out of this, but regardless of if you're atheist or religious, it doesn't matter. Everyone has expectations which go beyond what they should have.
Right.
They become disappointed, they become angry, they're frustrated, and then they blame the technique rather than looking at themselves saying that maybe the technique was wrong.
Right.
And we've talked about people who meditate and they don't get the results.
They don't get anything out of it.
They get angry and they get frustrated and they get
by
more
2
attention.
o'clock, if I'm not levitating,
Yes.
it's off. You were just chatting about the charismatic person comes to town. I was thinking of the Rainmaker.
Right. Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite movies because it goes into this how he's just whipping him up into a froth.
Yeah.
And you could say, yes, I caused that rain, or maybe not, hit or miss. So where do you see this difference of understanding of what spirituality means? Where do you see that going over time?
I think as the studies in neuroscience, become more popularized and are based upon better evidence. Some of the popularized material is too speculative yet, because the evidence isn't there.
Yeah.
But I think as it becomes more authenticated in terms of evidence and not speculation, I think that people will move. Well, we're talking about the academics first, because they usually are the ones who move first.
Yeah.
Sorry, but it's true.
Yep.
And that gradually you will see a change in people's attitudes toward it. I've seen that in my own lifetime from people who essentially looked at Eastern philosophy when it came into the United States, late 60s, early 70s, in terms of cults.
Yeah.
And I've shared with you my experience with Alan Watts as one of my first encounters with Zen Buddhism, and he was seen as sort of this crazy nut person. And this was true in the early 70s. You go back and look at the cult books of that particular period, and anything that came out of Asia was a cult. Or occult, even worse.
Yes.
And that by the 90s, you have a shift. Now you still see in the more hardcore fundamentalist examination, they'll still look at this as cult in a negative sense. In general culture, we move way beyond that. That we don't look at Buddhism as a cult invading, or Hinduism as invading. We see them as alternative religious experiences.
Right.
And if you speak to more ecumenical religious people, they will tell you that there are different ways to get to God if you want to do it from a religious point of view. And I think we're getting to the point where there may be even those in a very broad ecumenical sense that has nothing to do with religion, but it has to do with this understanding of the spirituality, bringing people together.
Right.
In a common definition for change.
Rather than being divisive.
Yeah. But as long as you have people, you're going to have definitional problems. And they're going to warp it to their agenda, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I think of I often think of Star Trek in this kind of context of the Vulcans, who have a...
They talked about the Vulcans just yesterday.
That you have a spiritual practice among Vulcans. Spock isn't all reason, logic, and ice. And as you see the programs progress, by the time you get to Picard, he's a different kind of captain. He's a different kind of person. He's more rational, but he still has a lot of compassion. Whereas if you look at the first captain,
early days,
Kirk is a much
technically Christopher Pike, my geeky show.
But
okay, we'll go with
we
Kirk.
know more about Kirk than Pike. But Kirk is a much colder personality in some ways, and yet irrationally emotional at times. That he doesn't have the balance that you see in Picard. And to me, that's sort of reflective of where we evolve or change. That we have a lot of progress to go through. Or as Clark says in his book, I'm going to get the book out so I know the title of it, Encountering Naturalism by this Thomas Clark, where Thomas Clark discusses naturalism as and he would like to see everyone become a naturalist. And I don't even disagree with him on this point. But he said it's not realistic.
Yes.
That,
of course,
materialistic interpretations of and acceptance of spiritual things, that's not coming tomorrow. But it is something that clearly, as a culture, we can move toward. And we may move in a better direction than some other cultures because of our great religious backgrounds.
Yeah.
That if we can come to a point where we can finally come to terms with the really dogmatic nonsense, the BS that people believe,
Yeah.
and we scrape all that away, or as you say, taking the threads out, tease them out, that within our religious traditions, there's a lot that can be very beneficial. It is the attitude of rejecting everything. I remember a student who was raised Catholic, and he rejected Catholicism and he joined a cult. Something like this guru that you were pointing out earlier, one of these swamis. And his parents wanted me to talk to him, which I did. I said, Tom, do you know what you're rejecting? Well, yeah. He said, I had catechism. I said, did you ever really read and ponder and look at your Catholicism? No, I don't need to. I know that I don't want it.
Yeah.
But he was reacting in an anger against a tradition that he never really understood.
Right.
And I make this point in lectures where I've talked to Christian groups. I said, I don't want you to become an atheist out of frustration and anger.
Right.
I want you to become an atheist because intellectually you have processed the information and you know that this is right. I said, if you have a question in your mind about your Christianity, your faith, go to your preacher first and see if he's got the answer. And if he doesn't, talk to me. But I said, first, know what you're rejecting.
Right. Have a full understanding.
Have a full understanding. A much more comprehensive understanding of what you've left and what you're getting into. And then you're not going to act, because otherwise it's irrational. And that's contrary to everything that we're talking about.
You know, it's funny because that's come up before where there was an article about Buddhist and sexism. That there were practices that were going on, and I think this article was about Thailand, that were very sexist. I said, yes, you're right, those are very sexist practices. And what this article was particularly pointing to was not actually part of Buddhist practice. And the person who posted this was is one of the more very active atheist individuals in the country, and had said, well, I don't know, I think it sounds like you're doing the no true Scotsman fallacy. And for those who are listening aren't familiar with that, the no true Scotsman is you have a set of behaviors that a Scotsman would do, and then when a Scotsman does them, there's a rationalization or resetting of the bar. Well, no true Scotsman would do that. And of course, there's no definition of what a true Scotsman is. And I pushed back of, well, I understand that. It sounds like I'm saying, well, no true Buddhist would do this, but I'm not. I'm saying very clearly what this action is found nowhere in this particular set of prescribed behaviors as part of the teachings.
Right.
That's not it. And so there was a discussion of cherry picking. When it's, do you want to throw out the baby with the bathwater? And this person presents as an atheist, but really they're just an anti-religious. They don't kick everything out. Period. It's all bad. It goes away. As our friend that we know in our group is an anti-religious. It's an anti-religious. It doesn't matter what it is. And when confronted with, well, what do you actually know about this teaching? What have you read? That's when our email chain stopped. Because he was confronted with, oh, yeah, I don't actually know what I'm talking about. I haven't actually studied it in the same way that he had another religious practice to be able to, beat people with their own holy book. Well, he didn't have the ability. He didn't know what he was talking about. And so my hope, although I don't think that's the case, is that he's gone off to do some reading to find out what it's about. I don't think that's likely.
No, unfortunately not.
No. You got something you found in the book.
In reference to what you were saying about a knowledge of, and we've referenced this before, how people simply they're stereotyping in the worst sense of the word And it is prejudice. And oftentimes, especially in the area of Christianity, when they reject Christianity, they reject the dogmatic form. That's what Dan Barker comes from, the fundamentalist background.
Right.
The most rigid form. My colleague in the secular Bible study that I worked with, I always told him that he was more of an atheist, maybe even than I.
Yeah.
And he had just graduated from theological seminary, which is a very liberal seminary.
Yeah.
And he is attempting to do some on the religious side, in a sense, what we're attempting to do here in a discussion, and that is to get people to look at the definitions and the terms. The reference that I'm looking at is, again, Encountering Naturalism by Thomas Clark. He says, from a naturalistic perspective, spiritual experience, and definition, the profound, direct experience of meaning and connection is a state of physical person, not evidence for a higher non-physical realm. After all experiences, according to neuroscience, are the brain in action. There's no ghost in the machine. Or link to a higher reality is necessary to explain them. Another book that we read, The Atheist Way, which you were not too fond of.
I was not. In fact, I'm not. Don't bother looking on the webpage for that one because I'm not going to link it up because I thought it was terrible.
I don't have the same take on Eric Wiesel. Because to me, Eric Wiesel was talking in similar terms that we make meaning. That's our adventure, is to make meaning, to make these experiences in life. That it's not something that's going to kind of be imposed from the outside, but it's something that we bring to the situation. And I understand why he has an ignorance in the area of Buddhism, which sort of tainted
my experience of his reading is that he would take things out of context, and completely misinterpret them. So in one chapter he would be saying, "Oh, we need to dispense with. I need to list a bunch of religions, and he would include Buddhism in a place where it absolutely didn't belong."
Right.
And then in the next chapter, he was saying, we should take a cue from Buddhism and do this other good thing. I'm like, dude, make up your mind. Right. Clearly you don't know, and do a little more reading.
And maybe I will make an excuse for him in that, although once you write something down,
you're stuck with it.
You're stuck with it.
Yeah.
That maybe he hadn't thought through that kind of an element.
Yeah.
That sometimes we are so assured of our own being right that we don't see our errors. I accuse myself of this often because...
and we all do it. And he's... I mean, in his defense, I can understand writing things at different points. It's when he was at the point where he was rejecting it, was rejecting it hook, line, and sinker. Baby bathwater, it's all gone.
Right.
And then he was recalling part of it to support his point later. Right. And that you can't do. You're either going to reject it in toto, or you're going to appropriately, as I think you should have done, is stated in a let's take out what's not of value and keep what is of value. Mm-hmm. That's not the statement he made. He's like, let's just get rid of all this stuff. Well, okay, then you don't get to cherry. That's what I would call bad cherry picking, is where I'm going to reject it, except for when it supports me. Mm-hmm. As critical thinkers, we can't do that. And folks who present themselves as critical thinkers, still being human beings, we all tend to go with what supports our view. And if we truly are being critical thinkers, we need to kind of question that a little bit more. We don't always do that, and we need to pay more attention and be intellectually honest with our critical thinking, and not just be in support of what we want it to support.
One of the great errors, I think, of people in doing research, no matter how well trained you are, we put blinders on. We literally will not see contradictory evidence.
Yeah.
That we block it out.
Confirmation bias is that's
We are
why
only
we do
looking-
double blinds.
Yeah, we only want what will support us, and we literally do not see the research that contradicts us,
Right.
or we immediately dismiss it. And it's true, in reading about the Shroud of Turin, for example, how it was a blind study. They had two different universities,
Yeah.
one here in the States. They had 4 different pieces of material from different periods of history. They didn't know which
They
was
don't.
the shroud,
You don't know which is, if any of them are.
which one was from the Egypt, and which one was from here. And the two universities came out with exactly the same time, based upon carbon dating. Yet, there are people who are writing about the Shroud of Turin as something that actually
Divine,
was
right.
on Christ. And they'll say, well, the carbon dating was off because they hit a piece of dirt or something on the shroud.
Right.
And that's why it's off. Well, here's an example of how we take evidence, hard evidence, and we twist it in order to make it fit. Well, hard evidence, does not fit.
Yeah.
It creates and doesn't
Yes. Right.
fit.
Right. It shows us what things are. They're indications. They are not there to prove our point. They're just there. The evidence is just the evidence.
And this is the difference to me between theology and science. Now, one I'm more familiar with than the other, but what I know about science is good. That with theology, we are always attempting to find that which fits. So Galileo comes along, it doesn't fit, therefore we dismiss it.
Yeah.
And the more dogmatic you are about your religion, the more you are going to reject material that's contrary because it doesn't fit.
Okay.
And if I can't make it twist it to fit it in, so we have the person who believes in 6 days with creationism, and you tell them there are dinosaurs, and they're billions of years old. Everyone knows
The Earth
they
is
were
6,000 years old.
That's right. And the dinosaurs actually were planted here by the devil
Yeah.
to deceive us. To what end will I go?
Right.
To twist the evidence in order to support mine.
In fact, there's
It's bizarre.
just a T-shirt that I want to get, which is Teach the Controversy. It's about this idea that, we should teach that there's a controversy about evolution. And there are a number of illustrations with it. One is there's clearly a devil cartoon character, and he's dropping dinosaur bones on the ground, and there's another one with what looks like an Amish fellow with a plow that's being pulled by a triceratops. You see that kind of thing in the Creation Museum in Kansas, wherever the Creation Museum is. That there's a dinosaur there that you can ride and have your picture taken on, or you used to be able to, and there's just such a willful ignorance of hard evidence. It's not an alternate interpretation of evidence. It's a willful ignorance of hard evidence. And I think we see that kind of thing with our friends who are looking at the word spiritual and pathologically rejecting it, pathologically rejecting meditation because it's from Buddhism and that's a religion, and so it goes away.
That's right.
Without a full understanding of, you don't need to chant. You don't have to do that to get some benefit out of having a spiritual practice.
And the assumption that everyone on my side is telling the truth. There's an example of this in science by a man named Sir Cyril Burt. He was a British Oxford-trained psychologist in the area of educational psychology. And he did blind studies with twins, which are almost irrefutable, in which he proved the inferiority of the races, black people. And I've always said his greatest contribution to science was when he died. and the reason is because he was, after all, Sir Cyril Bird. He wasn't just Cyril Bird. He was knighted because of his work. When they did the biography of Sir Cyril, they found out that he had no one help him, and it's pretty hard to compute all that stuff with either no computer, which he didn't have, they weren't around in those days, or without a lot of assistance. And usually professors had a lot of assistants who did their dirty work. He didn't have any.
Did his own dirty work, apparently.
Did his own dirty work. And not only that, he didn't have any files. And generally, when you're doing research, you get files and files of all this data and all this information. So the person who was doing the biography interviewed some of his friends, found out that he was a racist.
Big surprise with conclusions like that.
Big surprise. Yeah. That here was a man who internationally influenced educational policies in English-speaking countries in particular, the United States being one of them, because of his research about racism. Now, we have to be skeptical of the evidence that's thrown at us, regardless if it comes from a scientist, presumed scientist, or it comes from the side of religion. It is the skeptical attitude that's important here. And to reject it outright simply because it came from religion, or accept it just because it came from science,
isn't the case.
Isn't the case. The great benefit of science, it's also the pain in the butt, is there are no absolute answers. We live in doubt. And if you can't live in doubt, you're not going to be an atheist very long.
A dear friend of mine who's very, very religious had asked me a question in a class he was taking, the question of faith in a religious context, and I think that the teacher was making the point that, well, science takes things on faith all the time, that we're both faith-based. And we had an explanation or a discussion about this. We went back and forth a little bit, and as you do, that when we use the word faith in a religious context, and even within different religions, it has a wholly different meaning than when we use it in another context. When to try to strap on the idea that scientists accept things which have grounded evidence and are free to be tested and rejected or accepted is wholly different than you must accept this. Whether you question or not, you must accept this as divine truth with a capital T. So those are very different things. I accept that the world is round, not because I've seen it from space. I accept it because of the evidence that I've seen, but that's not faith in the religious context.
To directly address what you just talked about, there's a Glenn Borchardt, Borchardt, the scientific worldview. And he's a slightly different take on. He doesn't endorse the Big Bang, for example. He thinks that something happened, but he questions the use of that concept, I guess. He has 10 assumptions that science makes. And he said, we assume them, we don't know them. We can't prove them.
Well, and that's what my friend brought up, is that science can't prove, that the scientific method can't prove itself. I'm like, well, it doesn't have to. Its proof is in what comes out of it.
Right. That it's the evidence.
Good, I made a point. Someone actually got paid money. Glenn voted the scientific. Well, that's awesome. Glenn stole my idea. I got an email chain where I made that.
He has a lot of. You don't have to buy the book. He has a lot of stuff online.
Okay, all right.
Website. It's well worth looking. He's also has some lectures online where he talks about his 10 assumptions, and he's really trying to get us to look at science in a different way.
Yeah.
Well, whether he proves to be the answer or not, that's yet to be. But at least he provokes thought.
Yeah.
And I've always said this is the one thing about the difference between science and theology too, is science is willing to say, some of them dragging and screaming,
Corrective.
but it's corrective.
Right. It's self-corrective.
Paradigms, Thomas Kuhn talks about his paradigms, that the reason you talk about the paradigms in science is because they change.
Yep.
They're not in concrete.
Or stone.
Or
tablets,
stone. Or stone tablets. Whereas theology doesn't do this. If you were to look at a book on physics, about 1900, you will, and I have one someplace in my house, where it says, we have discovered all the elements.
Yeah.
We now can close the book. There's nothing more to learn. And 20 years later, less than 20 years later, that book is so out of print.
Right.
That this person who had the audacity to make this comment, who was a scientist, was proven greatly wrong. And hopefully it was embarrassed beyond belief. But as Dawkins says too, it is the competition among scientists to prove each other wrong.
Right.
Whereas the competition among theologians is to prove each other right.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I made that point to my friend is that it's not just you don't just get the profs for having a new theory or doing a new study. You get the profs for knocking one down and showing that it's wrong and backing up with evidence. And that's that self-corrective part. That, well, we take it on faith that, okay, here's a study, but the faith that I take is that there is action around validating it, and that we don't have that kind of validation in a religious context of the word faith, which is not to say, and this is where I come to the defense of religious experience, that it's not to say that the spiritual experience is not transformative and can be wonderful and all that. Of course it can. So before we go on to segueing to more topics, because we've been here for a good long while, is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Do we have to wrap up?
I know. Don't worry. You'll be called upon to be speaking with me again.
I'm full and overflowing with BS. Well, it's... To me, it is worth the adventure of living in doubt to discover the answers to these things, only to find out that the answers change. That living in concrete doesn't allow us much expansion without cracking the mold. And that to take a new look at spirituality, which is what I did coming from a theology background, cracked the mold. And what came out of it was so much more productive than what went into it originally. That it expanded. And if anyone has ever made kind of like a paper mache or a rough thing, where you can fill it with air and watch it expand and then just crack and break apart. That's really what happened. That at some point you need to do that. Or like the snake that changes its skin because it grows. If you're not growing, you're not shedding your skin. And you need to. We need to really challenge ourselves. It is the one thing that we don't do enough of. We become so satisfied, pompously so, arrogantly so with what we believe, that we don't move ourselves to question. And the best pin I know of to put on your chest is question authority. All authorities. Whatever authority you think is an authority, make sure you question them.
Including your own.
Including your own. Oh, most of all, your own. Yeah.
And on that, I think we'll wrap up for this podcast. Thanks, Grant, very much. I appreciate you being here.
If you would like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com. Each episode has its own page with show notes, references, and links to source materials. You'll also find resources on Buddhism, critical thinking, secularism, and links to the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for the Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaiser Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi. John Kaiser Neptune and Taihei Shakuhachi's websites are both linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment, every single moment, you have a choice. See you next time on the Secular Buddhist.